Welcome back. So, the really important passages in Amendment 1 have to do with reporting the news, reporting public advocacy, like being in support or opposition to a candidate. We see that, though not as much this year for very obvious reasons, but the times have certainly changed. We now have a federal election commission, that's the FEC, and if you remember from our in person meetings how much I love the FEC and what I've told you about that. They tell us what we can do and what we cannot do with our money when we engage in public advocacy, influencing candidates, influencing elections from a race for alderman all the way up to President of the United States. They put roadblocks in the way of candidates raising money for their campaigns. They put limits on it for individual contributions for companies. And the commission does this in spite of Amendment 1. And the FEC did this supposedly because large amounts of money corrupt. I would question, who does the large amount of money corrupt? Does the large amount of money of me corrupt me? Say I wanted to give, if I had $5,000 to give to a presidential candidate. Am I corrupted because I gave that money to the candidate? Is the candidate corrupted because he received that money from me? I don't think so, but this is what the Federal Election Commission says. It's about control, ladies and gentlemen. It's about control on their part. Did they do it? Did they put these roadblocks in place that you can only give X amount of dollars, you can only give so many times in a quarter, et cetera, et cetera? Did they do this maybe to protect the incumbents and prevent political insurgents? I'll leave that up to you to decide. Because incumbents can raise cash that insurgents can't. That's why the incumbency rate, say for the office of the president, is so high. He walks into the Brady press briefing room, he speaks into the microphone. What the president says goes out to every corner of the country and every corner of the world. That's the largest microphone on earth at the moment. So unless the insurgent is a celebrity that has a large following already, or just is a wealthy person in their own right, there's no chance. But you see, these wealthy people with followings already, president, senator. He tried to become a presidential nominee. Didn't work too well. We talk often more and more about regulating the internet, treating blog posts, say, as financial advocacy for a candidate. Blogs, websites, they come cheap. They buy them pretty cheap, but it's seen as a threat because since it is cheap, the internet with two E's and two T's, my God, is seen as a place where an insurgency can begin. And that is true. I mean, if you think of the Arab Springs over in Africa and the Middle East in 2011, you can see that is true. Insurgency began on Twitter. I mean, a blog post, a tweet, it's not the New York Times or the Washington Post, they say, but the guy that writes a blog that needs to be reined in. Some in Congress argue the press should now be licensed and laws made, there are laws that are made where no laws are supposed to be made. And these laws that aren't supposed to be made, that are made, are always made in the interest of the few, in the interest of the Donald Trumps, of the Mitt Romneys, of the Michael Bloombergs of the world. This isn't the worst of it. Because the courts have decided, Supreme Court on down, really, that Congress shall make no law means Congress shall make no law that we do not approve of. And this opened the floodgates to a steep decline in the freedom of speech. At the state and local levels, we have lots of legislation and ordinances about what citizens can do and cannot do in terms of advocacy. And because we have those laws, say you can't solicit votes more than, I don't remember off the top of my head. I'll get the number wrong. I'm going to get the number wrong. But like 10 feet in front of a polling place, you can't knock on doors in groups of 3 or more, or whatever it is. Bunch of silly laws and legislation. But we've made the office holders at the state and the local level the arbiter of the speech that can be tolerated. And this isn't something that the founders had in mind. This shouldn't be tolerated, to my mind. And those we sit in judgment of on election day propose to sit in judgment of us and regulate what we can say and how we can say it. And in many cases, these laws, they'll put obstacles in the way of public assembly and cooperative efforts because collective action is a threat to powerful people. You know, President Obama, for instance, had corporations that sought government contracts list their political donations. Now consider the implications of that. If you've donated to Democrats, Democratic candidates, whatever, you probably got a government contract. If you donated to the Mitt Romney campaign, probably not. And he's not the only one that did that. He's not the only president that's ever done that. Even where we are now, virtual college, virtual universities, in person, hopefully, fingers crossed in the fall, should be a place where all claims are up for dispute and where evidence can defeat ideology. I firmly believe that. That's why I like it so much when you guys challenge me, when you send me emails with questions, when you raise your hand in class and say, I don't think that's quite right. Love that. I love the debate and would never seek to silence it. And this was so in the United States for many, many years, but not today, because now nearly all public and private institutions of learning, primary, secondary, college, universities, they take money from the federal government. I can think of one college, Hillsdale College, that's out east, that runs entirely on private donations. They're a wonderful school. I have attended some lectures there. Absolutely great stuff. Constitutional perspective on things. This is where I got many of the sources for this lecture, and I think we did one other, although the name is escaping me, but I think we did one other that I took at Hillsdale. But the courts have ruled that this legitimates the government imposing any condition for the receipt of that money that it cares to impose, and enough money to get colleges to line up, so that there is a curriculum. There are things that have to be talked about. There are things that can't be talked about. You know, if you take the money, the thinking is, you have to abide by the terms and rules that the person giving you the money sets. And that's just life, really. But this shuts down the debate. I'm funding your college to the tune of 50 million taxpayer dollars. Now, shut the heck up about flag burning or abortion or whatever it is that we don't like in Washington, D.C. that you're talking about. And should the debate be shut down? No. We'll talk about that in a minute. Because what I need to talk to you about is hate speech. I didn't cover that. And I need to. So we're going to talk to the judge again. Let's try it again. All right.
Welcome to my chambers. With the awful events in Charlottesville, Virginia last weekend, involving white racism, involving aggressive language, involving Nazi salutes and paraphernalia, involving allegations and statements that somehow one race is better than others, the issue of hate speech has risen to the front burner. Is hate speech protected speech in America? Do you have the right to stand on a street corner and harangue a crowd on the basis of the race of the crowd? Is the most repellent speech that we hate and fear protected under the First Amendment? The answer to both questions is yes, because the First Amendment was written to protect the speech that we dislike, that we don't want to hear. And the Supreme Court has ruled on this numerous times. Here's the rule. All harmless speech is absolutely protected, and all speech is harmless when there is time for more speech to rebut it. The theory of the court is the remedy for bad speech, for hate speech, for incendiary speech, for speech that makes you want to kill the speaker, is not to silence or censor the speaker, but to challenge him with more speech, with better reasoning, because that's the history of free speech in America. If that logic had been followed in Charlottesville, we might not have seen the tragedy that we saw, where a crazy person drove a car through the crowd and an innocent young woman was killed after the police had left. Here's the significance. Because in America, the police have a duty to protect the speaker and to protect the audience, so that the speaker can speak and the audience can hear and the audience can react. But when the police leave and the audience wants to kill the speaker and the speaker's supporters want to attack the audience, you have violence and you have death. You also have the death of free speech. So in America, if we want to pursue happiness, we have to be able to say whatever comes to mind. Tolerance and patience will win the day, not censorship. Welcome to my chambers. Fight the good fight.
So it's important to know, that speech we dislike is still protected in most cases. It's like the judge said, unless it becomes harmful speech, there isn't time given to rebut the speech. Somebody just throws a punch, then it's on. But tolerance, as he said, and patience are really key, and that's how we restore civility. That's how we become better and more patient people, by listening to ideas with which we disagree. So, religious freedom, on to religious freedom. Jefferson called this a natural right for the pursuit of happiness, for Jews, Christians, Muslims, even more then, because religion still played a bigger part in life back then than it probably does for many of you today. The free exercise of your religion, it was the same thing to the founders as the pursuit of happiness. So the establishment of one religion, as we know from our study of natural law and seeing what happened to Thomas More, usually leads to the interference of the practice of other religions. Thomas More, Catholicism out, Anglicanism in, even though in reality it's probably like Lutheranism. Anglicanism is kind of like Catholicism light as well. But yeah, Henry VIII and the establishment of the Church of England. So religious liberty is a two-way street. Religious liberty cannot be a license for crime or to fail to do one's duty as a citizen. Your God cannot tell you to violate the law. It is not okay to murder in the name of a God. It's not okay to steal in the name of a God, whatever God you believe in. It's not okay to do the things that you shouldn't be doing anyway. Your religion cannot tell you to do those things. You can't fail to do your duty as a citizen. You got to report to jury duty. You got to vote. You got to do all these things. Religion can't be an excuse to shirk that. The social contract theory, that'll be on the final for sure. For sure. And we've talked about this too, although I didn't put this name to it. But this, you know what this is. This should sound familiar to all of you. You agree not to infringe on the rights of others. and agree to defend others' rights. They in turn agree to help defend your rights. So that's the basis for the United States of America right there. That's one of the founding ideas. I have the right to speak freely. I have the right to utter speech you might find offensive. I will protect your right to utter speech that I might find offensive. I will protect your right to own property. You will protect my right to own property in return. This isn't something, this is just kind of something you are born into. By being born into the world, you kind of implicitly agree to this, at least in the United States. FDR came up with an economic bill of rights. This isn't necessarily part of our government. I mean, some of the ideas of the New Deal and all that made its way in, certainly. But he says, and I'm directly quoting, "It is our duty now to begin to lay the plans and determine the strategy for the winning of a lasting peace and the establishment of an American standard of living higher than ever before known. We cannot be content, no matter how high that general standard of living may be, if some fraction of our people, whether it be 1/3 or 1/5 or 1/10, is ill-fed, ill-clothed, ill-housed, and insecure. This republic had its beginning and grew to its present strength under the protection of certain inalienable political rights, among them the right of free speech, free press, free worship, trial by jury, freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures. They were our rights to life and liberty." So we have these inalienable rights, but maybe these inalienable rights aren't enough anymore, says President FDR. As our nation has grown in size and stature, however, as our industrial economy expanded, this is still from a snippet of his speech, these political rights have proved inadequate to assure us equality in the pursuit of happiness. We have come to a clear realization of the fact that true individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. Necessitous men are not free men. People who are hungry and out of a job are the stuff of which dictatorships are made. In our day, these economic truths have become accepted as self-evident. We have accepted, so to speak, a second Bill of Rights under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station, race, or creed. And I'm not saying that this is, you know, this was more of a discussion point for when we were in the classroom. But it's something to touch on now, certainly. So FDR outlines what some of these economic rights are. We have the right to a useful and remunerative job in the industries or shops or farms or mines of the nation. The right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation. The right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living. The right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad. The right of every family to own the right of every family to a decent home. The right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. Now, obviously, we can't have a discussion. This is a pre-recorded message. You're listening to this probably on a Wednesday. I'm recording this on Saturday, May 2nd. But should these things be rights? Should somebody be entitled to a decent home? And if so, who sets forth the definition of what a decent home is? What exactly is a useful, going up to the top here, a useful job? Is that a job where we plow the fields and plant seed? Is that a job where we raise livestock? Is that a job in a schoolhouse? What is a useful job? How do you define that? Is that part of the pursuit of happiness that the Constitution talks about also? Your right to a useful job, whatever that may mean to you. And this goes on for probably about 20, 25 minutes when we're all together, talking about what these rights are and what they might mean. So he talks also the right to an adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment. So we've got Medicaid, we've got Medicare, we've got Social Security. I mean, this came to pass. This is, at least for now, I mean, I don't doubt sincerely any of us um, are going to see a Social Security check. That system I don't see surviving. But that came to pass after FDR. The right to a good education. Well, what is a good education? Is what I'm giving you a good education? I happen to think so. Some of you might think I've given you a pretty lousy education. What is a good education? So all of these rights, he says, spell security. And after this war, World War II is won, we must be prepared to move forward in the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness and well-being. America's own rightful place in the world depends in large part upon how fully these and similar rights have been carried into practice for our citizens. For unless there is security here at home, there cannot be lasting peace in the world. There's a government that does all of these things. I mean, this is a wonderful wish list. Is that a government that is or is not in control of our lives? Is that government telling you, telling me, telling whoever what happiness is or should be, or what it, what it could mean or should mean? Is it saying take what you can get? That's a question you all have to answer for yourselves. But limited government leaves us to our own devices. Limited government leaves us alone to find our own way to happiness. And the nanny state doesn't do that. That isn't my term. That's just what it's called. It's just one name for it. It looks after our happiness. It's a cradle to grave type thing. Britain, for example, is a nanny state. The former Attorney General, Eric Holder, sought to assert the right of the federal government, I guess spelled TN at the end there. It was pathetic on my part. I apologize for that. To oversee the hiring and firing of religious teachers by the Evangelical Lutheran Church. Now, why would the government try to get involved in what the Evangelical Lutheran Church is teaching? Freedom of speech is certainly under attack. It's certainly being interfered with. Freedom of religion is certainly also steeply on the decline. This was sourced a lot from Hillsdale too. And I'd encourage you over the summer, if you have time, if you're bored, if you just want to learn more about a real constitutional, down the middle sort of perspective, sign up. They offer a lot of free classes, a lot of free classes. And that is the end of the First Amendment. So reach out if you have any questions, comments, concerns, threats, and I'll see you next time.